So, hello world, I am Natalie, and you all look beautiful. Kawika is going to start us off with a reading.
Okay. I should just say hi, everybody, because there's so many folks I know here, so I'm really honored for everyone to come. So many people to thank. I don't know if now is even the time, but Brian is here from Arsenal Pulp, Hillary from Iron Dog Books, and of course Natalie, and Jorge, but also Natalie, who, as many of you know, has been very crucial in the literary world here, especially for Filipinx authors. And so the part that I chose to read from Of Floating Isles today was something that Natalie and I talked about, and one of her favorite parts. And it's also about writing and about libraries a little bit, because I owe so much to libraries. I'm sure many of you do, but I had very few books at home. Even today, I don't remember having a whole lot of books at home that aren't library books. And I often owe a lot of money to libraries sometimes for that reason. So I'm really grateful to be here. Okay. So this is from the 4th chapter of the book. And the book is subtitled On Growing Pains and Video Games, which is kind of like if you play a lot of games and you see something that's kind of like happy and a bit like free-floating like this, there's usually a sign that it's dark and dismal. Something inside of it is like not what it's supposed to be. And so like when people ask me what is the growing pains part, I think they expect some really lighthearted story, but there's actually some some pretty dark stuff in the book. So, for example, in this chapter, my first girlfriend has died, and tragically in a car crash when I was 17 on Christmas Day. So that's kind of how this chapter starts. And over time, I've used a lot of the strength and memory from people I know who pass away to become an artist, or to think about how I become a writer. Try to use it to write. And so this was happening when I was 17, and I decided to become a writer after failing everything else, every other type of art. And so that's kind of where this part starts. It begins with an epigram. Any consideration of what the novel is today, and any true understanding of what narrative aesthetics are doing in general, is impossible if we do not also understand the work video games are doing. Eric Hyatt, Video Games and the Novel. 1 year after Teal's death, I had shape-shifted into a despairing, self-loathing artist. This was my typical day. After working at one of the many jobs I hated, movie theater usher, knife salesman, warehouse stalker, typer, survey taker, I would return to my apartment below a freeway where I lived with 4 guys and other random in-and-out visitors. I would turn on the kitchen light, let cockroaches scurry into the cabinets, grab a cluster of beer bottles from the refrigerator, then collapse onto a mattress I had found in the dumpster. Because our air conditioning was always broken, I would position 2 fans. This makes sense because I was in Las Vegas. I would position 2 fans to blow straight into my face and then drink myself to sleep. In the morning, I would tilt every bottle in front of me until I found one with some weight, and I'd sit myself awake. I mention all this because, on the surface, I was an achieving academic, blazing my way from community college to university, acing all my courses even when I overloaded on them year-round. When I encountered friends from high school, they commented on how good I looked, my sudden thinness taken as a sign of health and self-control. My body withered, but my mind was on a constant adrenaline high. Whenever I wasn't in class, I was in the library. Yay. The only place with air conditioning where I could read and write in peace. My first writing course at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, was a mixture of ambitious MFA graduate students and undergraduate wannabe authors like myself. It was a pummeling introduction to shared writing. As one student pointed out, bringing a short story to a writing circle was like bringing a dove to a committee of critics and letting each one pass the bird around, each bending its form, cracking a different bone, breaking flesh, until it fit into their idea of an MFA story. What you had at the end resembled something beautiful, avant-garde, but to you, it was just a mangled bird carcass. The second thing I learned in my first fiction writing course was that video games were a taboo subject, signaling thoughtlessness and immature storytelling. Thus, my desire to talk about games alongside my stories marked me as an outsider and an idiot. Not only did I write stories about my experiences being Filipino, androgynous, and neurodivergent, but I also declared proudly that I found more inspiration from Final Fantasy video games than from Carver, Hemingway, or Cheever. I soon learned that there was no faster way to lose the respect of your peers, to doom your dove, than to say, my short story was inspired by a video game. Historically, writers have always had to hide their less respected influences. During the domination of Christianity in Europe, writers and poets hid their paganistic Greek and Roman forebears, just as scientists had to hide their denial of Scripture. During the Victorian age, many authors tried to downplay the inspiration that came from colonialism, drugs, and sex. Today, in an age when literature has come to replace the divine, to say that one's main source of inspiration is video games has a heretical imprint. Book reviewers often save their most vicious prose for comparing books to video games, such as when book critic Maureen Corrigan from National Public Radio lambasted Chang-Rae Lee's novel On Such a Full Sea as a literary failure, calling it, quote, a video game of a novel. As I quickly learned, any comparison of a story to a video game instantly makes the room cringe. It is an insult of the highest order. A writer can discuss the influences of nature, plays, music, cinema, anything but a video game. One day in our writing class, we had a very special guest, Wole Soyinka, the only Black African author ever to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, a telling fact that is still true to this day. Ever since I had discovered Soyinka's name on the UNLV faculty list, he had been a hero of mine. I had read his plays and essays, hoping to one day meet him, as he was rarely on campus. He was often either in prison in Nigeria or in hiding. Even when he was absent, our writing classes felt elevated just for being within his orbit. The class was eager to talk to Soyinka, but gave a collective groan when they realized whose short story happened to be assigned for that day? Mine. Our resident Nobel laureate was going to read a story inspired by video games. To my classmates' credit, my story was incredibly weird. It was about a man without any passion or awareness, your usual sim. One day, this man absent-mindedly trips and falls into a mall fountain. When he gets up, shivering his way out of the water, he sees that the mall is entirely empty of people. There is one other strange difference. It is full of eggs. So many eggs litter the floor that he cannot take a step forward without possibly breaking one. What will he do? How will he go on? Perhaps the story was genius. More likely, it was terrible. Certainly for the students and the professor, it was not the story they wanted to discuss, not on the day Wole Soyinka came to class. Soyinka's hair was far grayer in person than in his author photos, which reminded us that he was real and that he had been through hell. When it came time to speak about my story, he gave no evaluative comments, but asked how my imagination worked, where my ideas came from, how I'd come to write with such strange grammar and diction. I answered as honestly as I could. Sometimes I learned from literature, sometimes from the things in my life, and sometimes from video games. The professor tried to divert the conversation, to get Soyinka to give us his best tips for writing. But Soyinka kept prying. What games? Mostly Final Fantasy and other role-playing games. Some of the writing in them is in broken English, but it's interesting. Interesting. The professor kept trying to redirect the conversation, but we continued. Me, a self-loathing gamer, and the incomparable Wole Soyinka chatting about the Final Fantasy video game series. Though Shorinka didn't know much about video games, he did not assume they were immature or anathema for a writer. His ignorance of games only made them more thought-provoking. By the end of class, the rest of the room was stewing. How could our one day with the star of the MFA program be taken up solely with talk about video games? But I didn't care if they hated me or if they thought my writing was dull or uninspired. Wooly Shorinka thought my dove looked cool just as it was. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Like, when I first read this book, I read this book all in one sitting. I just absolutely loved it because I was telling Kawika earlier, we grew up in the same timeline. We are both like 90s children, queer children, Filipinx children. And I actually had a very, a similar story of being misunderstood in an academic space as well. Like, I went to an art school in Vancouver, I'll leave it unnamed, but very obvious which one it is. And I took a digital interactive visual arts course thinking they'd be accepting of video games. And I wanted to make a game about just this abusive relationship I had just gotten out of. And basically, you could pick between the two characters and play either the guy or the girl, and you have two completely different stories of their perspective. And I thought that was artistic enough for this class. My teacher pulled me into a one-on-one and was like, I don't know how to grade your project. Can you make a magazine instead? And I was like, no, that's completely a different medium. This is a digital interactive visual arts course. And through a series of conversations we had, she was like, I don't know how to grade your project, I'm sorry. And I ended up failing that project because she just was like, this isn't art. And funnily enough, I took another class, and I will shout her out, Carol, wherever you are, thank you. It was a graphic novels course. And my teacher, Carol, was more than happy for me to make some basically it's like a visual novel. And she's like, this is great. So I made the same project and I passed the course. So it really, I love the story you share because it shows the power of someone just believing and being curious about the work that you do. This is leading to the question of for you and I, from all our conversations, video games shape the way that we tell stories. And what do you think video games can teach us about storytelling that other media can't?
Yeah, I feel you on that grading part. And now when I teach courses, actually just today, a student posted a video game as one of the grading assignments, and it was an awesome game. So I feel like, there's a type of game literacy a lot of people don't have, but even we don't know how to evaluate it. We don't know even whether it's good or not. It's hard to say. But I think part of the way that we've understood games is so colored by the media and state narratives, and just so absorbed into the nationalist ether that it's just very, very hard to see what a game could do or what the different possibilities of it could be. And so in this book, I try to talk about games as poems or as types of poetic interaction. And I try to do that because they are like poems in the sense that they are very ambiguous. They are also, like poems, very interactive with one's imagination. And to just try and ascribe meaning to a poem can also feel very useless, in a sense. As someone who's written and taught a lot of poetry, that's just telling somebody that a poem means one particular thing can really ruin the experience for the person who finds that poem to mean something totally different. And I feel like, having spent 10 years now teaching games in universities, writing a lot about games, we kind of got to this point where nobody really knows what games are doing because they're so personal and they're so ambiguous. But you can say, this game has these communities, or you can say this game has impacted this person in this specific way. Or we can say, this game have helped me through these moments in my life. They've helped understand the world. They've helped develop some kind of ethics in a personal way. The games that I'm talking about that did that for me might have had the exact opposite effect on other people. And for me, that's a lot. That means that there's a lot of power and potential in these games. And those of us who play them kind of know that, but again, it's so difficult for other people to explain that. And then, you watch on the news, and as soon as something violent happens, they just say, oh, this is video games that did that. So that we feel kind of safe by enclosing their meaning, but they actually could mean so much and have so much power to do things. And I think that also has a lot of political impact that we are only in the aftermath do we realize this thing came from video games. And it's kind of too late by that point. So I'm hoping that it helps us understand games a bit better for how they affect us.
Yeah, and one other question I had for you when you wrote this book. Why did you write this book, and what reservations did you have about memoir? Because kind of going into that sort of nationalist narratives and even things like just common beliefs of video games, what were some of the challenges of working in memoir in this format of this book?
Yeah, I guess as someone who's so I originally got my PhD in English, and it was studying a lot of Asian American memoir and the tradition of memoir and personal story, and how it has changed so much from being a kind of bearing witness to an atrocity, like slave narratives, for example, to now being the most popular genre and in literature, and often being oddly very complicit in a lot of the power structures, even as the memoirs seem to be against it. And so that was kind of what I did a lot of my research on. It was who I was just to understand how memoirs, for example, would make a place like Canada seem like this very accepting, multicultural society, and the memoir is about how they overcame their original culture or parents or whatever in order to arrive and be happy there. So I wrestled with that a bit, and I had this vow to never write about myself in any of my work. Now it's all I do. So I think I had to break from it and really criticize it, and before I could come back to it and just find the trust in myself that it wasn't going to end up that way. My wife, also who passed away in 2022, almost 3 years ago now, wrote the book Land Bridge. And so she and I, Land Bridge is kind of a memoir, but she was a Cambodian refugee. We met in Hong Kong. I talk about her in this book. But because of her ability to use her life story to do exactly, have a very anti-imperial, anti-war, even anti-nationalist kind of outcome to it, was very inspiring. And her and I talked a lot about the politics of memoir and how to have that book, Land Bridge, be something that could really give, but also be difficult for the Canadian state or from something to rework it into their own thing. And so O Floating Isles was very much inspired by her work, and it gave me the strength and ability to do it myself.
Yeah, if you haven't read Land Bridges, it's such a great book. I was sobbing through it just because just the way that it's written. There's memoir, there's personal memoir, there's a historical, so much research that she did in that book. So I highly recommend it. If you have the time to read it, I also read it in one sitting as well, both of your books. So I want to go back to, what can games teach us about systems of oppression? Because I love I don't know if love is the right word, but I found the game Papers, Please super interesting because for those who haven't played it, it's a border patrol game. You have to look at clues to see if you let this person in or not, and it becomes this kind of mundane evil that you are perpetuating and enacting and preventing people from going in. And it's just a puzzle you have to solve. You just get into the zone and you do this task, and it kind of puts you in the shoes of someone who might have to do this on a daily basis. So, I mean, going back to my question, it's games have this potential of teaching us about systems of repression when it puts us in the seat. Because I think that's the misunderstood part about games, is when you see people shooting each other and exacting violence, it's about an anger. It's about anger, right? But it's not. It also has this potential to teach. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of like major political actors, like Edward Snowden, for example, who basically said like, I got my ethics from video games. You know, so to gamers, this is a kind of a known thing that video games inspire people to take political action. Some video games are they're all about that. Like one of the most famous, Final Fantasy VII, that we were talking about, you play eco-terrorists. That's what you do. And the remix went even further with that. It's like quite clear you're an eco-terrorist and the state hates you and FBI people are following you trying to get, you know. So this is like a thing that people who play games are always very familiar with, and not that surprising when you find that someone like Edward Snowden did what he did partially because of, you know, inspiration from games. At the same time, they clearly do the opposite, I guess, in the sense that a lot of games are a part of the militainment complex. I don't use that word in the book, so don't worry. But they're part of this complex of like entertainment and the military. And the U.S. military, for example, does sponsor a lot of games, and then games have to, as you know, take a lot of their pay money to like gun manufacturers, for example, to get the rights to use the weapons that they portray in the games. So there's just a very, you know, it's such a big kind of topic, right? And video games outsell every other media, entertainment media, by a long shot. 60 to 70% of every people in every so-called developed country play video games or have some unique association relationship with them. It's about the same amount of people who play sports. So just trying to like say anything definitive about the things they do or teach us is really difficult, because you'll find the exact opposite example somewhere else. But to use examples from my book, like there's a game series that really made me think a lot about how video games work on us. And so one is called the Far Cry series. And this is a game where you're doing basically like fun touristy things while shooting local people, like on island spaces and things like that. But what's interesting about the game is that there's like 7 of them now, but each of them has a different way of trying to make you okay with the fact that you're doing really horrible things, right? And so each one is kind of a lesson in propaganda and the ways that we can make, you know, seeing death and doing acts of killing and make us comfortable with it. And like one of my favorite examples from that is in the 4th one, where you are a South Asian American, and you go to like Nepal, and you have to like help free Nepal from this despot. And the only way to do that is to kill a lot of other Nepalese people. But because you are Asian American, it's okay, because you're not like a white guy doing it, and you're doing it while carrying an urn with your mother's ashes in it. So like every time you like take over a village and bomb something or something, you pray to your mother, and your mother's like, yes, good job, you know. So like this game teaches us how me, as like growing up in the U.S., like as Asian American, was very incorporated a lot into like the military system. Like that was a very real thing of this idea. And as you know, as like Filipinos also have a lot of, you know, inner colonialism that we go through. And so I just recognized this, and I was like, I know what this is, and I've never seen it expressed so explicitly in this way. Yeah, so they teach you things even if that's not their intention. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a game I was like, oh, should I be playing this? But so there's a quote in your book I really love. It's in video games. There are many words for anger, as there are words for loving care in a yoga studio, which always makes me giggle, because it's like I think the anger is somewhat like misunderstood too in games, or even that exploration of very problematic things, because in one of the chapters of your book, chapter 3, you talk about Counter-Strike, which you might read from this later, but you talk about the game Counter-Strike, which came out in '98, and it became like just a success because the war on terror was happening. And in your book, you explore how that was a bunch of teenage boys making sense of the world, making sense of a world that constantly broke rules and brazenly broke rules. And in CS, across cyber cafes in Asia, they could finally have rules and competitively play against each other. And I think about the creator Min Lee. He's a Vietnamese Canadian. Like, I believe when he went to SFU as well, SFU alumni, he co-created the game. His name is Usman Online. And I feel like he's not what people expect to have made that game. And like, I guess what does it mean when like those types of games get put into the world and they're so incredibly misunderstood, but they have the potential to lead us to our emotions, to like basically express anger, which is something you can't do on the street. Like, you can't just go around, like there's another scene in your book where you and your friends go into the suburbs and you play just with toy guns, but then you get arrested. And that's where, in video games, you have the potential of that safe space to explore those emotions as young men.
Yeah, the book is full of these moments where I almost die. And like one of them is because I'm with a bunch of friends and we have these toy guns that look exactly like real guns, except they have a little red tip on them, air rifles. And we get arrested, and it's very, very scary at the time. But anyways, so like Counter-Strike is one of those games that is entirely misunderstood, I feel, or just understood in only one framing, which is the war on terror. And I think kind of for good reason in a way, because the people who, were expected to join the military were like poor people of color, and men or boys, teenagers. And it was also like poor people of color, teenagers who were playing Counter-Strike. And so a lot of the same people who were learning about guns and playing this game where you play as counter-terrorists or terrorists, we're also talking constantly about, like, are we going to join the military? Are we going to join the war effort? And I was also like in junior ROTC, so I was that kid that like wore uniforms, like military uniforms to school, had the boots and had to shine my boots every day, and learn to shoot with air rifles. So like my high school had the top amount of teen pregnancies in the U.S. and like was one of the main recruitment centers for the U.S. military. So people were very encouraging about us playing this game and no one else. And then we also kind of copied that mentality by like seeing it as our own thing. But the game also, like, I want to use the game to someday like teach Derrida or like deconstruction, because it's a really interesting game where it started this whole like PC room phenomenon around the world. Like even in the countries in the Middle East that you would think would not be playing this game still play this game in very heavy numbers to this day. But in this game, you can either be counter-terrorist or terrorist, and you often don't get a choice of which team you're on. And I remember just being a teenager, and because everything is the same, whether you're a terrorist or non-terrorist, except for the way that you look. And not all the terrorists are look like people from the Middle East or people who are, associated with that, because the game also came out before the war on terror. But I remember being a teenager and being like, there's no difference between these two things in the game. And then we'd watch, the things the U.S. military was doing, creating terror all around the world, and we were like, there's really no difference in real life either. And the things that the U.S. military is doing, extra legal, creating terror, doing all the exact same things that we think of as terrorism. And so like the game also had this really weird moment that just disrupted our whole sense of reality and what we were being told from the schools, from media. And at the time, I did not see it as a big insight. I just saw like, oh, this is a problem with the game. Like the game is doing something wrong. And then later on, I realized like actually we kind of knew more than we thought we knew. And if we just saw games as being something different than we were told, we might have been able to take those insights a bit further. But yeah.
Just more comically, as at the time I was a very young girl, getting into CS was very intimidating, because just the amount of rage that goes on in lobbies full of dudes, basically. To that too, this is kind of a broad question, but I'm curious, for folks who are not familiar and they look at these shooter games as being like ultra violent. This is kind of answering maybe some of those questions they might have, like, oh, why would you be playing this type of game to explore this? What is the fine line to you between catharsis and harm?
Yeah. I mean, I talked about the Far Cry game partially because it is about pleasure and catharsis and like the relief that you feel in those moments. And I guess this is where a lot of, like especially shooting games, are taken up as esports games. And Vancouver used to be a bigger space for that, but now it's kind of moved, the esports scene keeps moving on. But it's similar to sports in that way, in that you are permitted to scream. You're permitted to like suddenly have big outbursts, just like, but you know, if that happens in a bar during the World Series, nobody really thinks it's a weird thing. Nobody, you know, I think it's really weird and violent, and I get really scared. And that's why I don't watch much sports, because I get really scared in those moments. And people I know who have watched a lot of sports, I've seen them be violent, you know, and so like I have personal experiences and traumas with those things. But then when I'm in a room, a PC room, there's all these people screaming at a screen, I don't think that's scary at all. So like I think part of it is just getting used to those spaces, or like understanding, you know, that this is part of the reasons that people go to those spaces. But again, I think with sports, it's like, yeah, you know that that's why you're there, is to like, you know, get some of that out. But with video games, you're kind of taught that this is all a bad thing. That like if you feel anger with a game, you're losing control. You are like a failure. You're a bad person. You know, you're supposed to be there to either win or, you know, have some kind of ecstasy feeling. But in the book, I talk about how like there was so little room, little space to express anger and to understand anger. And again, this was like during the War on Terror, where we were all trying to figure out who was going to, you know, what branch of the military we were going to. It wasn't even like, are we joining the war? It was like, what branch of it are we going to be in? And then seeing like, you know, a lot of injustices happen, and then realizing that seeing that the reasons for going to war were all a lie, you know. We had so much to be angry about and nothing to do with it. And so, yeah, it would come out in these spaces. And I think because we interiorized the media narrative that we were violent people who should not be, you know, out about in society, it would just make everything a bit worse. Like we would just then hate ourselves because we had that outburst, even though that outburst was like, you know, just part of this game world, and it was expected. And, you know, now I think I still play games sometimes to get angry. I don't know if anyone. I have an office at UBC, and every now and then someone's like, "Were you like having an issue?" Or like, "No, I was just playing this video game." Because I will still scream a little bit if something happens. But it's like, if I understand it, you know, I understand, and it gives you an opportunity to try and, you know, embrace those emotions a bit without anybody getting hurt or anything. So,
yeah, my friend was telling me she's a rage cleaner. I'm a rage Beat Saber girly that plays that dance game and tries to strike hard, even though I'm just hitting air. Another, like another one for me is Fortnite. I am a trash talker. I am very soft-spoken now, but if you get me into a game chat, you get a complete different version of me. So I've definitely like found joy in games, just being able to release anger, because I don't normally my day-to-day life. Like there's a lot of like, especially when you come from a marginalized identity, you can't always flip out at a boss. You can't always flip out at someone who's being like openly racist to you on the street. And then part of me buffering my own microaggressions of the day are through games, being like, you know what, I'm not going to overthink this. I'm just going to go kick some trash cans in this game all tonight. Yes, very real. So I wanted to like kind of switch up, because we're talking about the violence and the anger, but I want to talk about the gayness and the identity building. So I felt like growing up, I could like perspective switch. Like I am a big fan of the Legend of Zelda series. So sometimes I was the hero, Link, wanting to save Zelda because I wanted to save her. She was really cute. And other times I was Zelda and I wanted to be rescued by Link. And I think games have this enormous potential where you can write yourself into a game, your body expands into this more cosmic level, like we were kind of talking about player selection, like the creation of like changing your hair, changing your boobs, changing if you're like whatever race, like if you're a bunny race, alien race, dinosaur, whatever you'd like. But it kind of freed me as a child growing up with games because, you know, in the real world, I would have to go to like bathrooms and watch over my queer friend just so he wouldn't get beat up as he left the bathroom. And there were confines to our bodies in like RL or real life. And I'm like, I just want to like ask you about obviously I read the book, but for your journey, like what is the potential of having that cosmic body in games? Like one where you don't have to stick to the same thing, and like what is identity building to you as you play these like expansive games?
Yeah, I mean, I talk in the book about my experience with Final Fantasy VII, and I didn't play the game for like the first year it came out, but I was with all of these. I went on a computer and I discovered chat room role playing when I was 11, and so you would go into a chat room and pretend to be somebody else. And this video game was really popular, so I just started pretending to be a character from this game who's kind of like a very effeminate guy, I guess, but also quite evil, but kind of sexy in that way. And so I would just pretend to be this person, and then, you know, I was more into the writing part of it at first and just the playfulness, and then I was 11, right? So, and then eventually, like, steamy things would happen, and it wasn't necessarily gendered or sexual in the way that we might think of it in real life, you know? And so I guess I just had like any array of sexual experiences that you could possibly imagine in a chat room for like 3 or 4 years before I ever held hands with somebody else. So like all my sexual experiences, all of my like queerness and everything was just kind of like free for all, anything goes in these chat rooms. And you know, it was like, yeah, it was weird. But then I grew up in a very conservative Christian society, and so I was able to kind of do both of these things, like have this secret life that only my twin brother knew about, where I could like pretend to be a half cat person, and you know, who was being attacked by a vampire until suddenly it became fun, you know, until something more spicy happened. But yeah, so it would be like that, and then I'd go to church and be told that like if you like look at someone the same gender as you in a certain way, you're going to hell for certain. There's no, you know, and all this stuff. And I was just able to switch back and forth. But then once I got a bit older, a lot of, you know, it became so obvious that I was queer, you know, and that I had like such an array of different ideas about sexuality and identity and queerness. And yeah, I use the term cosmic, coming from the book Glitch Feminism by Legacy Russell, who talks a lot about this kind of thing too, that we have this kind of cosmic embodiment that comes through a lot of these virtual worlds. And especially when you grow up with it, it always feels like that is who you are, more than, you know, the different identity types that you're kind of cast on later in life.
Yeah, just quickly before we move into the Q&A section, I really relate to that as well, because as a child, I hung out with a lot of boys, and my teachers were like, don't hang out with boys, you're gonna have sex way too early, like what is this? And they got me to hang out with more girls, but me and my girlfriends, they showed me the world of like online chat in the 90s. So they were typing some dirty stuff in there, like to absolute strangers, because they were a lot more curious about it than my guy friends. I would tell my guy friends some of the weird experiences we had, and they're like, you guys are gross. And they were the prudish ones. And it was funny because actually hanging out with the girls as we were RPing, I found out I really like girls. Despite what my teachers were saying, don't hang out with the boys because you're gonna sleep with them. I'm like, I'm gonna be sleeping with these women. Like, what are you saying? Anyways, thank you so much for that. I feel like we could chat like forever. So I wanna open it up to the Q&A if anyone has questions for Kawika. Yes, go ahead.
So I remember near the conclusion of the book, you actually mentioned that when you were first writing the book, you were going to look at more from the neurodiversity angle, and you actually changed the trajectory of the ending of it. Could you kind of talk a bit more about maybe why you decided to do that and what it would have maybe looked like if you kept the original sort of theme?
Yeah, like, so I teach video games and I researched them as well, and I just realized there was some things that were happening in like pop culture, literary world that I really wanted somebody to do that with games. And so like I was a big fan of like Gia Tolentino's book, Trick Mirror, Carmen Machado's book, In the Dream House. And I was like, someone needs to do this with games. And so then I had this experience where I was semi-diagnosed with autism, on the autism spectrum. And I was like, okay, I need to write about this because it's pushing me to like re-narrate all of my life, and especially the way that I've built part of my career on video games. And when I tried to tell that to the person who diagnosed me, she was like, yeah, that's why I think you are the way you are. I was like, no, you don't understand. I write books and stuff, and I teach video games. And she was just like, yeah, tell me other reasons why you're not, neurodivergent. And so it was just one of those things where I think all the different ways of playing games that had been had so much potential and power for me were then being reshaped into like a pathology almost, or like at least a sign that somebody could see as like, oh, this is, a signal of, maladjustment or being asocial. So that's where the book initially started to come from. And as I started to write more and more of it, it became a lot more of almost like a memoir of a book. So it wasn't really intended that way. But I think it was partly just, sorry. Should we wait for them? They're just announcing it's closing. Yeah, I'll just keep going. So yeah, yeah, and I think it's just the way it happened. I can't really explain it because I didn't really like the politics of a lot of memoir, but I just found that everything I was writing, like, oh, this would really be helped out by things in my own life. And then I started to rediscover and face a lot of things. Like the death of my first girlfriend, for example, I thought had no effect on me for all my life. I was just like, that was, something I faced really well because I never like cried that much over it, good for me. And then I realized while I was writing the book, it completely changed my life. And so like things like that started to really come up, and I just didn't know what to do with all of it except to write about it. And then I also realized that like this is something video games do. Like they accompany you through these really dark moments, and then you store a lot of the trauma and the memory of that into the game that you're playing. And sometimes you forget about it. And then you go back to that game 20 years later, and all those images and all those memories come up, and you're like, oh my God. And so that happened to me frequently while writing the book.
I love the chapter where you kind of explore it like an underworld journey. Like in Greek mythology, I've never thought about that in terms of like games have the potential for you to re-explore those paths. Yeah, does anyone else?
Going into the underworld.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
So there are people that are inspired by things like video games or other mediums of art, movies, who haven't ever taken any kind of writing courses or had exposure to English analysis and these things that many authors have, and they might be interested in writing. What kind of advice could you have for people who don't have any academic exposure to writing and they still want to write?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a lot just in chat room role play, and it wasn't all like erotic. Like I would say like maybe 5-10% at the most it was. But I've always found it like a really, I always feel like glad that that's how I started writing, because I really just got better and better at, and I was often with the same kind of groups of people. And so it was really just about like, how do I walk into this room and like sit down next to somebody in a tavern and make it sound interesting, even though I've done this like 100 times with these same people. How do I describe this in a way that's more fun than it was before, that just reflects, different things or has a different kind of character or tone to it? And then you're also role-playing for so long in these characters that they become so separate from yourself. So that you might want your character to do something, but that you just know that that's not like in character enough. So you begin to really respect the characters that you play, that you make up, not necessarily from video games either. And that's, I think, how writers should approach their characters, you know, like not have them do things because for the sake of the plot or the writing. And so there's a lot of things from role-playing that I was able to translate very easily, actually, into writing itself. And it was, I always feel really fortunate that I'm able to get anything published and that anybody will read it, because part of me thinks I would probably just write it anyway, even if nobody was going to read it, because I just love writing so much. And when I was role-playing, I was just doing it for like hours every day, and I still want to do that all the time. Yeah, so I think starting out that way was always useful because I just became a daily practice for me, and just one that I always trying to get a bit better at and write in different genres. So if you're thinking about it, I would say just do it. You know, like go on internet forums, find where the fans are, all the fan art, people are trading stuff, and you know, just start writing, and then eventually you'll get better and better at it.
I have something to add too. I definitely have been a little allergic to academia simply because I don't have money, and I juggle a lot of elder care and life and work and stuff. So my advice is playing D&D and tabletop and role-playing, similar to you, has taught me so much about storytelling, because I think a lot of storytelling has its root in oral storytelling. The written word is an academic invention, for sure. And the other thing, too, is read all the craft books. One thing I love about this is not a sponsored ad for the library, but there's so many craft books that are actually quite helpful in the library that I found invaluable, especially when I'm like, I can't take a $30,000, probably more now. I don't even know how much it is right now. I'm like, I can't afford this MFA. And yeah, just like finding writing communities too, sort of what you're saying, like finding the community, because I think you and I have a very similar writing practice where we just like write every day. That's just part of our like identity. And then I find that so much of the work is by myself, so it's always very helpful to find like a group of people you can just run some crazy ideas with, and then they'll judge you, but like they'll still support you. Those are the best kinds of friends. Is there any, like, okay, over here.
I'm curious, in the beginning of this talk, you talked about how you look at video games as very similar to poems and having like a poetic experience in them. And so I'm wondering if we should just talk about that a little bit more. And I'm also just like playing with that idea because video games often offer a narrative arc that you go into, versus when you go into a poem, there's not always a narrative arc offered. And so I'm curious about that, and I'm curious if video games change how you write or read poems.
Yeah, I don't know if they've changed how I I think maybe they have a little, but I'll try to with the first part of the question. And so like I wrestle a lot with how to actually do this in practice. At the end of the book, I talk about macphrasis, which is this writing style about writing about video games, which is similar to ekphrasis. And ekphrasis is usually poetry that takes a work of art and tries to talk about all the things that work of art inspired. But it doesn't necessarily try to interpret that piece of art or analyze it. It's just like, this piece of art reminded me of my grandmother in this way, and it brought to light all of these different things. And so that's what I'm doing in the book, basically. I'm trying to do that with video games because, again, we have such personal relationships to them, and they're very ambiguous. But we can talk about the ways that they've inspired us and the things that they've done in our lives that have pushed us to develop different kinds of ethical, political standpoints, to like care for others. A lot of the last couple of chapters is about caretaking, caregiving, and the types of games that really model how to do that. Yeah, and so I'm thinking about how games are kind of poetics in the sense that they have this obscurity to them, and that they create these imagined, spaces or blueprints of ourselves that we can then try to choose to create or inhabit in real life. So yeah, like one example that I talk about in the introduction of the book is this game, The Path, which is like Little Red Riding Hood, and each you're playing these different little girl characters, Little Red Riding Hoods, and they each have a different. They're all very different women, but they are all struggling with things having to do with gender, sexuality, with being controlled, and things like that. But there's not really a plot or a narrative. You just kind of have to walk around and face all these different things. And so I try to use that game to think about gamers and the ways that we are kind of pushed to play in these environments, and then anything can kind of happen to us. But by the end of it, we've changed in some way, right? That this thing has accompanied us through some kind of major change. And it's because this thing has that poetic feel to it. It has that white space that kind of invites us to place ourselves in it, to have some time for reflection, to pause, right? Yeah, and so it's a very different point of view than a lot of people. But I do find a lot of designers really take to that and admire that part of it. Because actually, I'm not the first to compare video games to poems. The people who made that game, The Path, have this manifesto about video games where they talk about games as poems. And so it is a thing out there, and something I try to explore both in the writing and in the way I see how games have affected me.
There's also one of your students created a game based on a floating isles. And
They're right back there.
Oh, hell, I love your game. Shout out. And it basically, words fall from the sky and you have to catch them and you can make poems. So I'm gonna send you that because I know you. I think you'd really enjoy that. Is there any other questions? Up here.
Yeah. Jasmine. Yeah. Do you want to repeat just for the microphone so everyone knows?
I mean, I think it's about, sorry if I paraphrase this a little short because I know we're slowly running out of time, but it's about with your neurodivergence, the communication styles of creative writing programs, basically how have, and sorry, please feel free to correct me, how has it how have you kind of shifted with that understanding of your neurodivergence?
Yeah, and I think it was also about communication styles, right? And in writing, I mean, the one I try not to do the thing where you do the craft talk and give your top pieces of advice for writing. But when I do, or when people ask me, the one advice I usually have, besides maybe writing every day or trying to, is that is to take criticism well, like just working on that, and failure, not seeing failure as failure. And I remember reading that like a lot of the writers, like in the early 1900s, when they would get a short story rejected, they would literally just change the postage and change the address and send it back to, like, send it to a different thing. And it became so typical, like every day you just go look at, oh, what story is returned? Oh, these ones, okay. Maybe they would change a word or two, they might reread it, but by the end of the day, they've already sent it to the next journal. And so this idea of like, you know, you get rejected many, many, many times before you ever get anything accepted, was kind of ingrained to me from, like, as a writer pretty early. So I think that also, like, just being able to take criticism and ask for criticism is something that every, like, successful writer that I know, successful should be in quotes, because I think you'd be very successful just writing in chat room role play all your life. That would be great. But people who, you know, want to get a lot of books published, like, they take criticism and ask for criticism. It's not just because they have this amazing power to write all alone, you know, it's because they have people and community and support structure. And this book, my goodness, I could not try and count the amount of people who have given me feedback on every single part of this book throughout my life, because some parts of this book are from essays I wrote from a long time ago and that were peer-reviewed, that were like read by family, you know. And while I was writing the book, I was also talking to family and sharing it with them. I mean, it really is like a lot of people that helped with this book. Not to say like my editor, who, when I was writing the introduction, just was unhappy with every draft I gave her. And was just kind of a perfectionist for me. And she was like, nope, this isn't it. Nope, that's not it. You know, this isn't the book. This isn't the book. Until I got it right at some point. And, you know, at times I really was mad at her and mad at myself. But it really, really worked out. Because once I had the draft that we both knew was it wasn't even that good of a draft, I should say. It was just like we knew that what I was trying to do was the book, that this is what the book should be. You know, that moment was really great, and it would have not been the same at all. It probably would have been a lot worse if it wasn't for that kind of pushback. So being able to communicate too with your readers, your editors, about the style that you want, and being clear that like what you want to hear and how you want to hear it could also help a lot, because sometimes people need guidance and they might have thoughts but not want to share them. So.
Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing your book, and obviously I'm celebrating, you know, that this book is out in the world. I'm so happy that it exists, because nothing like it has existed before. And thank you for sharing, you know, your personal stories from like your first girlfriend all the way to your reflections of just being an angry teenage boy, a queer teenage boy. Like, in the words of my favorite League of Legends character, Seraphine, joy's too quiet without sorrow on the downbeat. So thank you for sharing this beautifully complex book that embraces both. Thank you, Kawika.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.